Hi, Dr. Bill here. Welcome to our next video blog newsletter. And of course, again, the topic is coronavirus, which I guess I apologize for, but it is hot at the moment, and I think any help that I can give you on that would be good. So I've got two things that I want to share with you today, and of those two things, I've got two links so that you can follow up on what I'm telling you. Now, these two links one of them goes for nearly an hour and a half, and it's for professionals only, so it is fairly complicated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down and simplify it for you, so you don't have to watch it for an hour and a half if you don't want to. I'll just try and give you the fundamentals, the important things. But if you want to watch it, that's fine. It's there, and the other one goes for about 45 minutes. So the first thing I want to talk about is what I'm quite excited about, and that is what I have termed a new breakthrough natural product for infections in the body. And obviously there are many things that can help infection, but this one seems to be very, very promising. Now, a man called Richard Stead, who's a chemist, and he has developed this product, and he owns a company that markets the product. To give you a little bit of background, he had spent a lot of time researching this, and it's a passion of his. Now, he's formulated something called hypothiocyanate, or which you can call it OSCN. Now, the brand name of the product is KIB 500. So I don't know which one I'm going to use, but there's obviously three terms there, so I might jump around a little bit. Now, in the body, your body actually manufactures its own thiocyanate, and when there's any infection in the body will manufacture its own thiocyanate, and in the presence of the infection, it then combines with oxygen, which is the hypo part, the hypothiocyanate, and it combines with oxygen. Often a free radical or an infection will give off hydrogen peroxide, H2O2, which provides the oxygen part of the formula. So the body's able to use oxygen combined with the thiocyanate in the body to treat an infection. Now, we also have this substance, interestingly, in our tears and in our saliva. And you notice how cats will always lick their wounds, or dogs. And my brother-in-law tells me he's convinced that letting his dogs lick his wounds on his legs helps them to clear up much quicker. And I've noticed if ever I've got a wound on my leg, whenever I'm with his dogs or my daughter's dog, they want to lick my wounds, and I say, no, get off. I still haven't gotten used to the idea. But anyway, I digress a little bit, but a little bit of a story is always good to start it off. So and there's many research papers that have been put out on hypothiocyanate, but no one's ever been able to make it because it's so unstable outside the body. But this chemist has been able to formulate it and test it out. Interesting. So he originally, when he first made the product, he was keen to try it out. He persuaded a doctor to try it on his patients. Interesting doctor. And they got such good results. He was encouraged by that, and he was able to set up a trial in a hospital of 120 patients that all had infections of some kind. And a lot of them had upper respiratory tract infections. Get the connection? Because the coronavirus is an upper respiratory tract infection. So they were able to get improvement within 24 hours of about 85% of the people that tried this on. One dose it took. Some of them, a few of them needed 2 doses. Maybe they were more severe. I'm presuming that was the case. So they got 85% of them got significant results, so much so that the day after they took it, they wanted to go back to work. They felt so much better. So he knew he was onto something. Now, I must emphasize here that this is not being trialed on the COVID-19 virus yet. So he goes to great lengths to point that out, but I'm sure it will be. And I can tell you, if I get any type of infection, which I don't very, very often, but sometimes it can happen. Usually my wife gives it to me. I'm glad she's not watching this. So that's where mainly I get anything from. If I do get it, she brings it home. Anyway, I digress again. So if I got sick, if I got COVID, or if I got any type of infection, I'd be of all my other things, but that would be the first thing I would take, because it acts so well and so fast. So that's how I'm excited I am about it. Is it available? Yes, it's available. I have ordered some. I don't have it yet. I haven't tried it. I haven't. The downside is it is expensive. It costs anywhere between $100 and $150. I'm not sure yet for one dose. But some people can't afford that. I get that. But then anything that powerful obviously is not going to be cheap. But if you only need 1 or 2, if the problem's more severe, then to me that's a great investment rather than spending a week or even more suffering and off work, etc., giving it to others. And let's wait and see as far as the COVID virus is concerned. Now, is it available naturally? Yes, it is. You can actually get it in brassica vegetables, things like cabbage and broccoli. If you are going to use the broccoli, the recommendation is that you don't overdo it. But I with the cooking, and I'm a great believer in sprouts, and I think you get a lot more value in sprouts because you're not using cooking or heat to affect them. So I'm assuming that the broccoli sprouts would be a good source of them as well. So that was the first point I wanted to make about this gentleman, Richard Steed. Now, my second point is the one of the what I call the 3 experts who gave a webinar that I was privileged to attend, and Richard Steed was one of those 3. So I won't talk about him anymore. I'll just go on to the other 2. Now, in my last blog, I mentioned the Dr. Alberto Garoli, Italian. I think he's Italian. He certainly sounds foreign anyway. European of some kind, probably Italian. And he's an osteopathic physician working in Italy at the what I call the coalface. He's actually working in a team that is working with the coronavirus patients there. And he has a lot of experience, excuse me again, which he knows, a lot of experience. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that he was recommending, and also Paul Clayton, Dr. Paul Clayton, who's a PhD in pharmacology, and he's got a special interest and passion about diet and the immune system. And what he has found in his work is that the beta-glucans is a very powerful remedy for building up the immune system, which he recommends, obviously, for the COVID. Now, you might think, well, what are beta-glucans? Beta-glucans, you can actually buy them as a nutritional product, but they're usually made from a variety of things. That can be made from usually the cell walls of fungi or yeasts or algae or even some grains like oats and barley. So the beta-glucans is in our food, or should be in our foods, but it's more powerful. It can be extracted and taken separately. So he mentioned that as one of the things. I'm going to go through a list of things more things to take. I know it can get quite overwhelming. I remember when I was battling my cancer and there was that many remedies and that many products that you could take, it became actually overwhelming. There was just too many to take into account. So it's a little bit like this with the COVID, I know, but I'm just telling you what these people are recommending or using, either for prevention or in some cases for treatment. So he recommended the beta-glucans. He also recommended actually using the mushrooms themselves. Now, as you know, there's different kinds of mushrooms, the shiitake, the reishi, etc. They all have shown in research to actually even help cancer and certainly boost the immune system. So he doesn't specify which mushrooms, just talks about mushrooms. So that's a really good tip or hint. In our practice, we have a mushroom extract that one of my assistants is using, as well as a homeopathic, as a preventative tool for her for the COVID. And she did that through her own testing and came up with the mushroom extract, totally independent of what I'm saying now. So there's an interesting correlation there with what she came up with. So the mushrooms and also yeast. We didn't specify which yeast. So I know Brew's yeast certainly has the beta-glucans in it. Problem with yeast is that, if you've got a candida tendency, then the yeast can aggravate that. So I'm always a bit cautious and hesitant about using yeast. I know my wife took Brew's yeast for quite some time, didn't seem to affect her. I don't know whether I'd get away with it. But you could certainly, if you don't have a problem with candida or yeast, the Brew's yeast would be a real cheap thing to add to your diet. And of course, the mushrooms and the mushrooms taste good too. So they're the main things that Dr. Paul Clayton recommended. Now I'm going to go into the things that Dr. Alberto recommended. I'm just going to give you the list. He talked about, obviously, zinc as a preventative. But once an infection kicks in, including the COVID, what he recommends is stopping the zinc and using copper. He found that's actually more effective. And as you may be aware, copper and zinc are antagonistic to each other. So you can see how you can get the best of both worlds by using one as a preventative and one as a treatment. And that's what he recommends. And I've mentioned earlier in a previous blog that copper you can buy as a supplement, or you can take it as chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is high in copper, and chlorophyll is made from usually alfalfa, and alfalfa is very alkalizing, which I talked about in my last video, and I'll just finish on that at the end about the alkalization. So the zinc, he also recommends the brassica vegetables, which again in its correlation between Richard Steed and Alberto, talking about the brassica veggies, the cabbage and the broccoli, etc. He also recommends manganese, not magnesium, manganese. It's a different mineral. Somebody said to me the other day, what's the difference? Well, they're just two different, and manganese is usually needed in much, much smaller amounts. Now, many, many years ago, I remember reading some research about manganese in asthmatics. And in this research, they found that all asthmatic patients that they tested were low in manganese. Very interesting. So can you see the correlation here? That they're using it in Italy for treating COVID, which is a respiratory infection, and manganese is deficient in asthmatic patients, which is a lung problem. So interesting connection there. So he recommends the manganese, essential fatty acids, iron, vitamin D. Now, in my previous blog, I mentioned what the Orthomolecular Medicine Society recommend, which was actually 5,000 international units for 2 weeks, then dropping down to 2. Dr. Garoli actually recommends taking 10,000 international units. So I think that's interesting that even though the Orthomolecular Medicine Society is renowned for using high doses, his dose is even higher. So interesting point there. Now, Dr. Garoli is also a qualified in traditional Chinese medicine, and so he also recommended certain herbs that could be useful in both prevention and treatment, according to him. And in the video, he talks about the botanical names, so you probably won't recognize them. So what I've done is I'm going to give you the list. I'm going to give you the common names of those herbs that he recommended. And one of them was astragalus, and most of you have probably heard of that. Another one is Baker skullcap. Now, in my early days when I was studying herbal medicine with Dennis Stewart, we learned that skullcap actually is very helpful for the immune system, not the immune system, for the brain and the nervous system, and very good for things associated with brain function, especially mood and other things like that, depression, anxiety. So the skullcap was recommended way back then. So this is the Baker skullcap. Another one was Turkey rhubarb, which is very similar to ordinary rhubarb, and depending on where it's grown. And they use the rhizome of the Turkey rhubarb. Licorice, you've all heard of that. And a lot of these herbs actually work on the lungs. Licorice actually acts as a demulcent, which actually helps to get the mucus off your lungs. And the other one is elderberry, which is actually very good for controlling fever. He also recommends the hydroxychloroquine, which of course is a drug, and you have to get that from a doctor, but he recommends that. There is some controversy over that hydroxychloroquine, but there are certain hospitals in certain countries are using it with good effect, and some of them are claiming, there's been no trials, there's been no studies done on COVID, and all this other, shall we say, political correctness. But it's an anti-malaria drug, and according to many reports, it seems to work. And of course, Donald Trump mentioned it. And of course, as soon as he mentioned it, all the left media went, and started trying to discredit him and discredit it because he mentioned it. So sad how politics comes into it. But when you do take the hydroxychloroquine, you need to also take zinc with it. And a contraindication is if you have a heart problem, because it can slow the heart down. So if you have a heart problem, it may be contraindicated. It may not be wise to use it. And also the HIV antiviral drugs can actually work too, but they're harder to get. And for surfaces, he recommends using hydrogen peroxide on surfaces to kill it. The body actually makes its own hydrogen peroxide, H2O2, in the body to actually kill unwanted guests, but it can act as a free radical in the body. That's why it's got to be broken down fairly quickly to hydrogen and oxygen. So the other thing, very interesting, is he pointed out how people that have thicker blood are more prone or more difficult patients when their blood is thicker than when it's thinner. I think that was an interesting point that he made. And one of the simplest ways to thin your blood is water. Simple as that. And again, this may have nothing to do with it all, but as you're probably aware, in the winter, our blood is thicker to keep us warm, and in the winter it's thinner to keep us cool. So is there a corollary there between being more susceptible to viruses in the winter because our blood is thicker? Probably for other reasons, but that may be one of them. And the last thing I just want to finish on is the fact that I mentioned in the last blog about the vitamin C. Even though that's very common and popular with everyone, he advises caution with anyone who has a tendency towards acidity. So I just wanted to give you all of that. A lot of information, I know. Watch the videos if you want, and I hope that's helpful to you, and I'll talk to you soon. See you later. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being with us.